It isn't recognition that reaches you first. It's familiarity. The unsettling sense that something ancient has been watching your life unfold without needing to interfere. When the story says Enoch knew your soul long ago, it isn't claiming memory, it's describing continuity. A line that was never broken, only unspoken. Enoch, in this narrative, is not a figure of history. He is a symbol of early perception, the kind that existed before language hardened into doctrine, before truth was organized into systems. He represents a time when awareness wasn't explained, only lived, and something about you has always operated from that same place. You may have felt this as a quiet mismatch with modern urgency, as if the speed of the world was slightly out of rhythm with how you process meaning. You don't rush understanding. You don't settle for surface clarity. You let insight descend until it reaches something stable inside you. That way of knowing feels old, not outdated, but prior. The idea that Enoch knew your soul doesn't mean he knew your name, your face, or your life. It means he recognized a frequency of attention, a way of standing in reality without distortion. Enoch walked without needing proof, because perception itself was enough. You've carried that same orientation forward, even when the world around you forgot how to value it. You may notice how this shows up in your relationship with belief. You don't cling to it. You don't reject it either. You sense when something is true without needing it to be defended. This unsettles people who require certainty to be loud. Your certainty is quiet. It doesn't argue. It rests. There have been moments in your life when understanding arrived before explanation, when you knew what mattered before you could say why, when decisions felt aligned long before logic caught up. This isn't intuition in the casual sense. It's recognition without time pressure. A kind of knowing that doesn't panic when answers take longer to surface. Enoch's knowing was this kind. He didn't rush revelation. He didn't broadcast insight. He observed, integrated, and walked accordingly. That posture, walking without needing validation, has always felt natural to you, even when it made you feel out of place. You weren't ahead of your time. You were untethered from it. This is why you've never been fully captured by eras, trends, or collective mood. You participate, but you're not absorbed. You notice when meaning thins. You feel when words are repeated without understanding. And you don't panic when old frameworks fail. You wait for clarity to reorganize itself. The story doesn't suggest destiny or hierarchy. It suggests recognition across continuity. That some ways of seeing don't expire. They pass through lives quietly, reappearing wherever attention remains honest and undistorted. You didn't inherit a role. You carried a posture. As this realization settles, something eases. The sense that you've always been slightly early or slightly late dissolves. You weren't misaligned. You were listening to a deeper rhythm, one that doesn't announce itself but remains consistent across centuries. Enoch didn't predict you. He recognized the way you stand. And that way of standing never needed to be taught. The next part will move closer into how this ancient posture shaped your life choices without you naming it, and why you've always trusted alignment more than instruction. That posture shaped your choices long before you realized you were choosing anything at all. You didn't follow instructions easily, not because you resisted authority, but because instruction felt incomplete without resonance. If something didn't settle in your body as true, you paused. You waited. You let alignment answer before obedience ever entered the picture. This is why your path never looked linear. You didn't move from step to step the way others expected. You moved when something opened, not when something was demanded. To outside eyes, this looked like hesitation or unpredictability. Inside, it felt like precision. You were waiting for the moment when action would feel clean rather than forced. You may remember how often advice bounced off you without conflict. You listened. You considered. And then you did what still felt accurate days or weeks later. This wasn't stubbornness. It was trust in a deeper calibration. You didn't need to rebel against guidance. You simply filtered it through something older than rules. Enoch's posture was the same. He didn't receive commandments carved in urgency. He walked in ongoing attunement. He adjusted as reality revealed itself. There was no separation between knowing and living. That integration is what you've always sought, even when you didn't have language for it. This is also why pressure never motivated you the way it motivates others. Deadlines without meaning drained you. Urgency without clarity made you slower, not faster. But when something aligned, when timing, purpose, and readiness converged, you moved decisively. No wavering, no second-guessing. Once you stepped, you didn't look back. You may notice how this has protected you. You avoided paths that looked successful but felt hollow. You stepped away from roles that demanded constant performance rather than presence. Even when those choices cost you temporarily, they preserved something essential. You didn't trade orientation for approval. People may have called this intuition, faith, or independence. None of those fully capture it. It's closer to continuity. You carried forward a way of moving that doesn't fragment under noise. A way of listening that doesn't require constant reinforcement. You didn't invent it. You remembered it. This remembering didn't make life easier. It made it truer. You felt discomfort sooner. You sensed misalignment before it became visible. You couldn't unsee what didn't fit. That early discomfort saved you later collapse. What felt like delay was often avoidance of paths that would have required self-betrayal. As this becomes clearer, you may feel a quiet validation, not excitement, not elevation, but relief. You weren't lost when you stepped away. You weren't slow when you waited. You were honoring a rhythm that predates instruction and outlasts trends. The story continues by moving inward again. How did this posture affect your inner world, your relationship with doubt, silence, and solitude? Why did being alone often feel less lonely than being misaligned? That understanding comes next. Blessed by His grace? Click Super Thank You and give $20 to spread His light. Your gift plants seeds that grow His kingdom. Be the blessing. Solitude never frightened you the way it frightened others. It wasn't emptiness. It was clarity without interference. When you were alone, your thoughts didn't echo back at you in noise. They settled. They arranged themselves. Silence wasn't absence. It was alignment returning to center. You may remember how crowded spaces made you feel more alone than quiet ones ever did. Not because people were unkind, but because so much of what was spoken felt disconnected from truth. Small talk exhausted you. Performative certainty unsettled you. You sensed when words were being used to cover uncertainty rather than explore it. In those moments, silence felt honest by comparison. Doubt also behaved differently inside you. It didn't spiral into self-attack. It arrived as a pause, a signal that something needed more time. You didn't rush to eliminate doubt. You let it sit until it either dissolved or clarified what was missing. This patience prevented you from building belief on unstable ground. Enoch's posture carries this same relationship with silence. He didn't fill gaps with explanation. He allowed understanding to mature without force. Silence, in this sense, wasn't withdrawal, it was incubation. You've practiced this without naming it. You've let meaning form instead of manufacturing it. This is why you rarely felt the urge to defend your inner world. You didn't need to prove it. You knew that what was real would hold without performance. When questioned aggressively, you often disengaged, not because you lacked conviction, but because you recognized when a conversation wasn't built for truth. You saved your energy for spaces where listening was mutual. You may notice how this shaped your resilience. When life disrupted you, you didn't seek constant reassurance. You went quiet. You recalibrated. You waited for orientation to return before acting. This inward turn wasn't avoidance. It was repair. You trusted that clarity would reassemble itself if given room. Being alone didn't make you small. It made you accurate. You didn't dissolve into collective moods. You didn't borrow certainty to feel safe. You allowed yourself to not know without panic. That ability kept your inner compass intact when external signals conflicted. As this settles, you might realize something subtle. You never feared being alone. You feared being misaligned. Solitude often corrected misalignment. Noise often created it. This awareness guided your choices more than any advice ever could. The story moves forward now by connecting this inner posture to the outer world. How did this way of being shape your relationships, your timing with others, and the moments when connection finally felt real instead of performative? That comes next. Connection only felt real to you when it didn't require adjustment. You noticed this early, even if you couldn't explain it yet. Some relationships asked you to translate yourself constantly, to soften truth, to speed up feeling, to slow down perception. Those connections drained you, not because they were wrong, but because they demanded fragmentation. You learned to step back quietly. When connection was right, it was unmistakable. Conversation didn't rush. Silence didn't threaten. You weren't pulled forward or held back, you were met. These moments were rare, but they recalibrated you completely. They reminded you that resonance exists, and that waiting for it was never a mistake. You may recall how your timing with people often confused them. You didn't attach quickly. You didn't detach dramatically either. You watched. You listened. You allowed consistency to reveal itself. This wasn't caution born of fear. It was discernment born of experience. You understood that alignment shows itself over time, not intensity. Enoch's posture echoes here again. He didn't gather crowds. He walked with understanding. Those who could match his pace stayed. Those who couldn't drifted without conflict. You've lived this same pattern. You didn't lose people because you changed. You simply stopped compressing yourself to maintain proximity. This is why betrayal rarely shocked you the way it shocked others. You often felt it approaching, not in detail, but in direction. A subtle shift in presence. A misalignment in intention. You didn't accuse. You adjusted. When separation came, it felt less like loss and more like confirmation. You also noticed how few people could remain with you when clarity deepened. Not because clarity excluded them, but because it required honesty they weren't ready to sustain. You didn't judge this. You accepted it. Everyone has their own timing. You honored yours by not forcing closeness where readiness wasn't mutual. As you grew, you stopped romanticizing connection. You valued fit over frequency. One accurate bond mattered more than many partial ones. This didn't make you colder. It made you cleaner. Your energy stayed intact because you weren't leaking it into relationships built on misunderstanding. This shift created space. And in that space, something unexpected happened. Connection began to find you. Not through pursuit, but through recognition. You encountered people who didn't ask you to explain your depth. They simply stood within it. Those moments felt ancient, effortless, and stabilizing. The story moves inward one last time before it turns toward closure. How did all of this, silence, patience, selective connection, shape your sense of self when no one was watching? Who did you become when the world wasn't asking anything from you at all? That answer comes next. When no one was watching, you became simpler. Not smaller, truer. Without external demands, your sense of self didn't collapse or expand. It settled. You didn't rehearse identity. You didn't perform coherence. You just existed in alignment, and that alignment felt sufficient on its own. You may remember how different you felt in moments of complete privacy. No urgency to decide who you were. No pressure to justify direction. Your thoughts slowed, not from exhaustion, but from clarity. You didn't need constant stimulation to feel alive. Stillness carried its own depth. It allowed you to hear yourself without distortion. This is where your relationship with purpose quietly matured. Purpose didn't arrive as a mission statement. It showed up as congruence. When your actions matched your inner orientation, you felt whole, even if nothing externally impressive was happening. When they didn't, discomfort appeared quickly, guiding correction before damage could settle. Enoch's knowing lived here as well. Not in public acts, but in private consistency. He didn't separate the inner from the outer. What he understood in silence shaped how he walked in the world. You've lived this same integration. You don't become someone else when alone. You become more yourself. You may notice how this protected you from losing yourself to roles. You can step into responsibility without being consumed by it. You can contribute without disappearing. You return to yourself easily because you never left. This return is effortless because it's familiar. You've practiced it all along. There's a quiet dignity in this. You don't need to be seen to be real. You don't need acknowledgement to stay aligned. This independence isn't isolation, it's stability. It allows you to show up fully when it matters and to rest fully when it doesn't. As this settles, you recognize something important. Your inner world was never waiting to be discovered. It was waiting to be trusted. Once trusted, it didn't demand attention. It guided gently, consistently, without drama. You learned to listen without interrogating every signal. The story moves forward now by widening again. How does someone who is this internally aligned move through a world that rewards noise, speed, and certainty? How do you remain intact without withdrawing, and engaged without fragmenting? That balance is next. You learned to move through noise without absorbing it, not by resisting the world's speed, but by choosing where you matched it and where you didn't. You understood that not every signal deserves response, and not every demand deserves priority. This selectivity preserved your alignment when others burned out trying to keep up. In environments that rewarded volume over substance, you stayed measured. You didn't compete for attention. You waited for moments when accuracy mattered more than performance. When those moments arrived, you spoke plainly, and because you hadn't diluted your voice, it carried weight. You didn't need repetition. One clear sentence often did more than a dozen emphatic ones. Speed tested you differently. You could move fast when clarity was present, but you refused to substitute haste for understanding. This wasn't caution, it was respect for consequence. You knew that decisions made without coherence would return later with interest. So you slowed down just enough to prevent future correction. That restraint saved time others never recovered. Certainty, too, lost its glamour for you. You didn't trust it when it arrived fully formed without examination. You preferred grounded confidence, the kind that can say, "not yet," without collapsing. This made you uncomfortable for people who needed certainty as reassurance. You didn't provide it. You provided honesty. And honesty has a longer shelf life. Remaining engaged without fragmenting required one discipline above all. You refused to split yourself to fit context. You adjusted expression, not essence. You translated without distorting. If a space required you to abandon integrity to belong, you declined quietly. You didn't make an exit dramatic. You made it clean. This is how you stayed intact. Not by withdrawing from the world, but by meeting it on terms that didn't require self-betrayal. You participated where alignment was possible and observed where it wasn't. Over time, this built a life that felt coherent rather than impressive. And coherence sustained you. As this phase settled, you noticed a shift. Fewer internal negotiations, fewer lingering regret. You spent less time repairing choices made under pressure. Your energy returned to you because it wasn't leaking into misaligned commitment. What you gave fully. What you didn't, you released without guilt. The story is narrowing now. The outer and inner have nearly met. What remains is to see how this way of moving, quiet, aligned, selective, changes the meaning of legacy, not as something you leave behind, but as something that persists through how you live. That is next. Legacy stopped meaning what remains after you're gone, and started meaning what holds while you're here. You realized that endurance isn't built through statements or symbols, but through patterns that don't fracture under pressure. The way you listen, the way you decide, the way you leave things better aligned than you found them, without announcing that you did. You may have noticed how this reframed your sense of contribution. You weren't trying to be remembered. You were trying to be accurate. Accuracy creates continuity. People carry it forward without needing to credit the source. A decision made cleanly sets a tone. A boundary held quietly teaches others how to hold theirs. This is legacy without ceremony. You stopped chasing scale for its own sake. You cared about transferability. Does what you do make things clearer for the next person? Does it reduce confusion rather than add sophistication? Does it stand when you're not present to defend it? These questions guided your actions more than recognition ever could. There's a humility in this that surprised you. You didn't need to be central. You needed to be correct. You were content knowing that what you stabilized would continue functioning long after attention moved elsewhere. This contentment wasn't resignation. It was maturity, understanding that impact compounds best when it's quiet. You also saw how legacy fails when it's rushed. When people try to force meaning, they leave artifacts instead of foundations. You refused that. You chose pace over publicity, depth over visibility. What you built didn't depend on your presence to stay upright. That independence was intentional. As this settled, pressure fell away. You didn't need to prove usefulness. You knew where you were effective. You knew where you weren't needed. You stepped into the former and released the latter without resentment. This selectivity protected the integrity of what you touched. The story moves now toward its final turn. Not to summarize, not to elevate, but to let go. When clarity has done its work, it doesn't cling. It releases. It trusts that what's aligned will continue aligning. Two parts remain. One to describe that release as it happens, and one to end cleanly, without holding on. Release happens gradually, almost unnoticed. One day you realize you're no longer carrying the need to frame your life as a story at all. You still remember where you came from, what shaped you, what clarified you, but those memories no longer ask to be interpreted. They sit quietly, integrated, no longer demanding meaning. You may notice how light this feels. Not empty, unburdened. You don't revisit old decisions to justify them. You don't replay moments to extract lessons. What mattered already stayed. What didn't dissolved on its own. This trust in what remains allows you to move forward without dragging explanation behind you. Your attention shifts from reflection to presence. You're no longer standing slightly outside your own life, observing it. You're inside it, responding in real time. This doesn't reduce awareness, it sharpens it. You're less abstract, more embodied. You feel when something aligns immediately, without translating it into narrative first. This is where effort drops to its lowest point. Not because nothing is required of you, but because resistance is minimal. You act when action fits. You wait when waiting preserves coherence. You don't second-guess these movements because they don't come from impulse. They come from orientation you've lived into. Others may sense this shift without naming it. Conversations with you feel complete, even when brief. Decisions around you feel settled, even when provisional. You don't rush closure, but you don't prolong openness either. You let things finish when they're done. That alone creates relief. You might recognize that fear has little to work with here. Fear needs ambiguity and urgency to grow. You provide neither. You don't pretend certainty, but you don't dramatize uncertainty. You hold space for reality to arrive in its own time. That patience neutralizes pressure without confrontation. As release deepens, the past loosens its grip. Not because it was resolved perfectly, but because it no longer defines your posture. You carry forward only what strengthened alignment. Everything else fades naturally. This isn't forgetting, it's filtration complete. One final part remains. Not to close the circle. Not to restate meaning. But to end the story the way you now live, without insistence, without explanation, and without holding on. Nothing announces the end. You simply notice that you're no longer waiting for anything to resolve. The tension that once asked for answers has gone quiet, not because it was defeated, but because it finished its work. What needed to align already did. You move now without checking yourself against an internal map. You don't ask whether this moment fits the story. You respond to what's in front of you with the same steadiness you've always carried. Choice feels natural. Stillness feels earned. Movement feels clean. There's no need to protect what you've become. It doesn't require guarding. It sustains itself through practice, through how you notice, how you pause, how you proceed without forcing meaning onto events that don't ask for it. You trust that what's true will continue to surface when needed. You don't carry Enoch's name with you. You don't carry symbols or language. Those were bridges, not destinations. What remains is posture. How you stand, how you listen, how you move through uncertainty without trying to dominate it or escape it. That posture is intact. If others recognize something in you, they do so quietly. If they don't, nothing is lost. You're not here to be identified. You're here to remain accurate, to reality, to timing, to yourself. That accuracy is enough to guide what comes next without prediction. The world continues to rush, to declare, to demand certainty. You continue differently. Not above it, not apart from it, within it but unentangled. You don't need to slow it down or keep up. You meet it where coherence is possible and let the rest pass. There is no final insight waiting beyond this point. No reveal, no elevation, just continuity, clean, steady, and usable. What you carry works. What you don't need has already fallen away. The story ends because it's no longer needed. You're already walking,